All right, I want to call this meeting to order for Celebration Community Services. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda, please?
Motion to adopt.
Second. It's all you.
Second will be David.
Vaughn and David.
Got you, Rachel?
I'm sorry.
This is a practice run before 6 o'clock.
Vaughn and David.
And David. David second. Any conversation before we call the vote? Okay, all in favor of adopting the agenda?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Passes unanimously. Okay, we have board minutes for February 4th that are revised based upon the conversations that David, Debbie, and I had on February 27th. We've got the February 27th minutes, March 11th minutes, and April 1st minutes. Might I have a motion to adopt these?
So moved.
Might I have a second?
Second. Second, Vanessa.
Vanessa the second. Any conversation on any of the minutes? For the sake of the audience, we had reviewed and exchanged comments as we were finalizing them, so board members have reviewed them.
Except I wasn't present for the first two, so I won't vote on
Right, for the
approving those.
I do have a question on the February 27th minutes.
Yep.
In which there is a redacted statement as noted in the minutes above.
Yep.
I'm not clear on the extent of the redaction. And I recognize we can't talk about what we redacted, but was it extensive? Was it minor?
No, it was very minor. The honest answer is that at the meeting, David and Debbie and I went through some stuff. I had some redactions. The document that was redacted actually got lost. So they forwarded me Debbie's email. I went through, fixed some typos. So it's pretty much verbatim exactly what Debbie had sent as her comments. So it's redacting is extremely minor.
Thank you.
Okay, with that clarification, any other comments? Call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Okay, next item on the agenda is the discussion of the tax attorney's legal letter regarding CCS activities. We hired Johnson Pope as our lawyer. They are different than Tom Slayton in the firm, which was part of what we had agreed to do. I will go through and give the highlights. I spoke to Johnson Pope a time or two on the phone. They put together the letter. Basically, the highlights of the letter are that, Celebration Community Services, and I will just call it CCS, is a 501c4 organization. The board, this entity is allowed to take contributions or grants and pass them through to for-profit organizations. The issue is that they must be for a common good, and a common good is defined as for the common good and general welfare of the people of the community. Mm-hmm. There is a requirement that they go to organizations where any individual does not have substantial influence over CCS. To the best of my knowledge, no one on this board is receiving any contributions. Basically, it's been for Posh Pooch, or it's been for items that went to Lexon of Celebration, and plus we had the inventory and a few things like that. So we do not have any exposure there. With the letter, Celebration Community Services can employ private for nonprofit entities to provide services. For example, hiring CCMC is perfectly legitimate. Again, you cannot have somebody who has substantial influence over CCS, which we do not have. Celebration Community Services can benefit both the residents of Celebration and the community as a whole. So CCSC can accept a grant and pass it through. That will be for the benefit of residents throughout Osceola County and others. That is perfectly fine. We are not allowed with CCS to have any political influence. We can't campaign for candidates, we can't give contributions to candidates or anything like that. And we're also not allowed to operate as a social club. For example, the Artisan Park Club could not be a 501c4 because it's for the benefit of people in Artisan Park, as an example. The business affairs should be governed by a board of directors, and the directors must be active, informed, and engaged. I think probably, in all honesty, we were lax in the past. I think now we should, at a minimum, have a quarterly board meeting and have, we're going to have the audit coming up. I'll talk about that in a minute. We certainly should have better, stronger board oversight, which we've been making moves towards. We've had several board meetings as we just approved the minutes, so we have fixed that. From a legal perspective, what I read here, and I had showed it to others on the board, is that we're in good standing with how this organization has behaved. And I would welcome any comments from the board. Jackson. And if I can ask, if people can pull their microphones open, because I've studied some and I found out it's awful hard to hear us sometimes.
Okay, hopefully that's enough. I want to go back to the statement that Mrs. McDonald read into the minutes of February 27th. And I want to quote from that and put it in context of what we've just heard. In her statement, and I'm reading from the minutes, Mrs. McDonald says, "I'm concerned that it might be a violation of the Internal Revenue Code for a tax-free nonprofit to distribute money to a for-profit corporation. The majority of the checks are written to Lexon, a for-profit corporation to use for Now Snowing, Hearts of Reality, Fall Festival, and others." That's her statement. It seems to me, in reviewing the letter from Johnson and Pope, that the statement is not correct, and that in fact we've not violated any provision of the Internal Revenue Code based on the allocation of monies from CCS to Lexon for the use of these other items. And I want to make that point clear. If someone else on this board disagrees, say so. But I don't want these statements in the record to remain unchallenged when, in fact, and when we get to the Experience Kissimmee letter, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I think that there are statements here that were absolutely incorrect.
And for the minutes, I agree. We should state that what we have done, accepting grants from Experience Kissimmee and passing them through to Lexon of Celebration, is totally legitimate per the letter, and I can also tell you that I spoke with the lawyer, and he told me it was perfectly legitimate, provided you meet the other parameters here about for a social good director oversight, and that type of stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
Other comments on the legal letter?
It's good to have that.
Oh, I think it's excellent that we got it.
Good to have that.
So, reading this in context then of the Experience Kissimmee letter, which I think we need to go to next. So the issue was also raised, and Jackson said he'll bring it up later, that, would Experience Kissimmee be happy? I spoke with the Experience Kissimmee CEO, who had told me he had had several conversations with Debbie and provided information materials to her too, by the way. And he actually told me that Lexon materials were among the best that they receive. He told me the amount of detailed support they provide, which even includes stuff like the front and back of the checks and stuff like that, was excellent. They actually use some Lexon materials for training type materials. He couldn't. So the relationship has worked extremely well. He understood and knew that funds coming through CCS were coming from Experience Kissimmee to CCS to Lexon. He had a direct relationship with Lexon. Lexon had been fully cooperative in providing materials. They visit Lexons and go through post-audit type things. So what this letter here strives to do is to say, here are the rules that are required for Experience Kissimmee. And there's 7 or 8 bullets there. And then in the last paragraph, what he specifically says, as post-event reports have been submitted and meet all requirements. All grants have been used appropriately, and financial statements with supporting documentation have been supported to verify the use of funds. So to the specific question of, has Experience Kissimmee been utilized properly, has everything been supported? Because, and I'll let Jackson bring up his point here in a minute, I was told orally, and this confirms in writing, that everything is legit. Now, Jackson, go ahead.
I'm going to go back to the statement that Mrs. McDonald read into the minutes, and she said, audit requirements for Experience Kissimmee have not been met for the disbursement of funds. Then she says she's requested copies of checks, and she hasn't received copies. Then she finishes the paragraph by saying, I feel that this organization, and I assume she means CCS, has not been transparent and may have violated IRS and Experience Kissimmee rules. Again, I want to be clear that the letter from Experience Kissimmee says in that last paragraph exactly the opposite, that the rules were followed, that receipts were received, that reports were made, that there was transparency. And I think it's important that the record fully reflect that the opinions of this prior board member were simply that, opinions, and they do not have a basis in fact, as it appears now, and should not be presumed to be true. And I appreciate that Experience Kissimmee reached out to us, was transparent and honest with us, and told us what their experience was. And I would hope, and I assume that this letter from them will be added to the record so that we know it's time to change classes.
The professor in you. Someone call it and say no.
No. So, I'm just asking, and I'm assuming at this point that that letter would be read into the record.
The third bullet in the Experience Kissimmee letter actually says organizations must also have a governing board operating under a set of bylaws and submit IRS Form 990. That, what we are required as a 501c4, and for the record, we ought to say that Mary Ann is an expert on this stuff because she deals with a lot of nonprofit stuff, is that we do that form. We have done that form every year, and they know that, being Experience Kissimmee. So I believe that your statement is a correct statement, Jackson, that we have satisfied all those requirements.
Thank you.
So, any other comments on the legal letter or the Experience Kissimmee letter? I believe those two items have helped us a lot. David, you were certainly present earlier.
The only comment, and I know you said this after the tax attorney's letter, I hope that Jackson's statement and reflections on the letter that was read into the prior minutes are reflected in this meeting's minutes.
And we specifically asked Rachel to draft those in.
Thank you.
That helps to correct the record, to base it, in fact, to use your words.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
The next item I had is, we have not officially removed CCS from suspension. I would like to recommend now that we remove them from suspension because it's legal. We know that the grants have been working fine, and we are spending funds, and we need this board to be able to approve the expenditure of funds and stuff like that. So I would like to request that we get a resolution to remove the suspension of CCS activities.
Do we need a resolution or a vote?
I think we need a motion. We need a motion, so I think we need a motion.
I'll make a motion that we remove the suspension of CC activities.
I'll second.
Mary Ann's the second.
And the discussion is this, we have accomplished what we set out when we imposed that suspension 3 months ago. We said we would do it.
With one item outstanding, which we'll talk about here,
Right.
being the financial
But
audit.
basically, we just wanted to hold things for a
Yep.
while.
I think we got our concerns answered with the letter from the attorney and from Experience
Experience
Kissimmee.
Kissimmee, right.
Okay.
I feel comfortable with that motion.
And we have the audit piece coming.
Yes, any other comments?
Yes. Are we leaving the inventory with CCS, or are we going to move that to?
We had already made a motion that had been passed to move it, so I would like to get it moved. But
We were just making sure that the activity was no longer suspended.
Right, so that's why, so let's do the vote. Before we go to the details, let's go to the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Okay, now that the suspension is lifted, we have the financial audit that is getting ready to start.
Ron hasn't gotten back to me yet. I emailed him actually on Monday, but it's going to start in the next week and a half. He said it couldn't start until after the 26th or something.
He's been finishing up year-end stuff. So we know the financial audit with stuff will start. I'm sorry. So we're good to go with the financial audit. We will move the inventory the way we had talked about, and we had the furniture and fixture that of depreciation that we were going to move onto the Crowa books or sell for the net value. All good?
Yep.
Okay. Next item, discuss the overall budget for the CCS audit and legal expenses. We actually approved the CCS audit prior at $4,500, so I think that ought to be in the budget. The legal expenses, I got the initial bill, and it's I'm going from memory here, but it's roughly $700-800. So it's less than Jackson's $1,500, so we did well. And we've got the 4th of July expenses that we previously approved. So I don't know if we need a resolution or not. I think we've opened it up for business, so I think we're good, right?
Yeah, the budget was approved by this board for 4th of July, and I think that that's all the expenses that you have, especially since you're moving in.
Well, we're going to have the legal fees. I've received an email saying, here's the legal fee.
Right.
So,
Do you want a motion to pay the legal fee?
Motion to pay the legal fees.
Second.
Okay. Vanessa motion, Jackson second.
Thank you. It helps when you're repeating, get close to the microphone.
Okay.
And
You gotta
then,
have the microphone closer.
Brian, since you have a motion in a second, we will, for 2020, we'll develop a budget during annual budget cycle.
yeah, I think we're going to have to later on talk about getting a budget dealt with for this year. I'll bring up some issues here in a minute. Okay, so the motion that Vanessa made was that for the legal fees of less than $1,000 to be paid. And the second was from Jackson.
Jackson.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. We have a resolution to have all CCS expenses paid out of CCS.
So moved.
Second.
Any conversation? So I got one item here that I want to bring up, which is Vaughn had brought up, and Kevin had sent me an email. Vaughn had brought up, should the parade expenses on the morning of the 4th be a CRO expense or a CCS expense?
I think it's a legitimate question, but for this year, it was already budgeted under CROA. You can certainly move it if you'd like at this point in time, but it has been budgeted as a CROA expense for the parade.
The parade strikes me as a CROA. The parade itself strikes me as a CROA event.
I think the question was, is it political? And if having a political candidate or a office holder waving and walking through the parade, does that make it political? I did a little bit of reading. I don't think that's the intent of the political connection, but Mary Ann's the expert here, but that was my reading.
You're fine if it's someone who's currently in office and not an active campaign. If they're an active campaign, they're a candidate, that's another matter. Then you're taking a political position if you're giving them exposure that you're not giving to their opponents.
Okay.
What if it's an incumbent that's in
If
the
it's an in-
parade running?
If they're incumbent and they're running, then they're actively in campaign.
Okay, then that would actually argue to me that it needs to be a CROA expense, because CCS, we read earlier in the legal thing, cannot endorse candidates or anything, so that would argue to me that the parade should be a CROA expense.
We
Unless-
have allowed both parties to submit their candidates in the parade.
Unless, of course, we choose as a board to not have that anymore, in which case we would shift it to CCS, and then that would be no longer permitted. So that's,
But we also let the political groups within Celebration march in the parade as well. You have the Democrats, Republicans, you know.
That's a little bit different because they're not campaigning for anything.
So it's only a campaign.
Well, they will.
You
They
can't
will.
endorse.
they will, though.
They do, they bring their signs.
Oh, they
for
bring their signs, because you're
candidates.
not supposed, but if you've given each side equal opportunity, but you really shouldn't be bending political at all, because.
Look, I'd rather we just stay clear and keep it.
Stay with Crows.
Okay, so then what we're saying is, we have a resolution for CCS expenses to be paid out of CCS that I think you made, and somebody seconded, and David seconded. And then we're going to add on to that, that the parade will stay a CROA expense as we have political candidates.
That keeps it clean.
And it keeps it clean. I mean, we can pretty that up a little, but everybody knows what we're saying. Any other comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Discussion of future grant utilization for CCS. To me, this affects the budget for the year. We know that Posh Pooch happened, so here, three of us, David, myself, and Vaughn, had a meeting with Mike Nunez, just a regular briefing type meeting. Lexington of Celebration is going for a 501c4. They're not going to have it in place by the time they need to submit their grants. So the question before the board is, do we allow them to use CCS one more year, being this year, with the understanding that for lots of reasons. People in town don't want us supporting them longer term. But then we support them as a good faith partner for this year, and then in the future, they can use their own 501c4.
I motion
How
to,
about-
oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
I was saying, I motion to approve that for this, as long as they're waiting, their status is pending, that we continue the relationship as we've been working through.
Was that a second or a motion?
That was my
That was a
motion.
motion,
Okay.
and now we're in this.
I'll second for discussion. But what I'd like to say is, should we put in that motion that this will extend only up until they receive their own 501c4?
I just said while pending.
While pending, or?
But you don't know what the results are gonna be.
Right, so
Well, not
that
that
would be my question. If it turns around and
They
they
could
can't get
get
it, we've heard
denied.
already that it's perfectly legal, that you're not doing anything wrong. Do you even want to put that parameter on there at this point in time, or do you want to hold it if you need to add that later?
Or just say 1920.
Yeah.
20,
right.
I would give it the,
2020.
just the,
And then
yeah,
vote again
I would,
next year.
I'd be careful with that kind of verbiage.
Yeah, you'll lock yourself into a corner.
So continue,
Unless that's
so
your
I motion that we continue the relationship as is
For the 1920.
for the
2019.
Could I tailor that a little? I think we need a budget for CCS for this year to meet our director's responsibility, as we read earlier. What if we said for the 2019 budget that we'll submit to this board for, let's say, the May meeting, that we will include the utilization of grants consistent as we've done in the past? Is that fair?
And just to avoid maybe question by some people who have had questions, you could just also add that little piece consistent with the parameters
Of
of
the
the
law.
501c4.
of our status.
Yep.
I think you're going to need to restate that motion clearly.
Okay, Rachel.
Rachel's like,
You want to restate it, or you want?
Go for it.
This is Vanessa's motion.
Go for it.
We will develop a budget for 2019 for Celebration Community Services that reflects the utilization of grants consistent with what we have done in the past, subject to the guidelines for 501c4 entities as provided in the legal letter that we have.
How's that sound?
Better, Rachel?
We have it. We
That's
have
recorded.
it. We have it.
And who's the second?
I thought Vaughn was the second.
That was the second.
Vaughn's the second.
I'm the second.
Any other comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes.
That's it.
I have one, go ahead, David.
No, just in relation to that, when I saw this on the agenda, I actually thought it was something else, and although I support what we just did. At some point, maybe this is a future CCS meeting, or maybe a little bit now, looking or brainstorming about what might be other sources of funding appropriate for CCS that would benefit our community.
Yes,
When I say our community, I mean our,
I'm very
In,
interested in that.
in conjunction with what Mary Ann was talking about.
Oh, we were talking about
Yep.
a meeting or two.
Yep.
Yeah.
On the assignments list, Mary Ann's actually the point person for this exact item. Yeah, I would like to use CCS for stuff that benefits CROA long-term and let Lexington do its thing.
Yes.
whatever that might be.
Yeah, but that would need to be explored, and I think that's a great opportunity to bring residents to the table for a brainstorming session about things that they would like to see that, you know, maybe we can find grant monies for, but maybe we can't. You know, the parameters are very clear, and that needs to be shared, but I think it's an engagement point opportunity to raise the.
Would that be like meeting with the rec committee?
Yeah, I can talk to the dog park. I'm already on special events and dog park.
Special events and.
Because I think there are some things that could be done for special events and even to support the dog park or the fields that could, but we'd have to find the funders. I mean, it's a process.
I'm going to make a suggestion. When I was at the PTA at the K-8 school, Laura DeJean she spearheaded grant like to the nth degree. I think she got over $15,000 and then $25,000 in grants back to the school. So I have Laura's contact information. I think she would, if we were to create something for that, I think Laura would be a great asset for that.
That's a great
And
She likes to write them?
She can do everything. And she's passionate about anything with regards to grant, yeah.
And we're not
she's-
talking about some, my goals are for some major grants, like
And
to pay
she-
for the lights at the dog park.
And she would be all over that stuff.
If you can do that, you would be a hero.
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
So out of this, there's, I see 3 strands. One is what might be some of the needs?
Right,
And your comment about maybe asking some of the committees.
yes.
And, yeah, some of the.
Getting input.
But there also may be some of the needs that come out from our community survey, our facilities master plan. So that's one strand.
That's-
Where are the needs? Second strand is where might there be funding? Where might there be funding that we become aware of? XYZ Foundation, XYZ Business has $10,000 grants for blank. And that might stimulate an idea that we hadn't bubbled up. And it's like, oh, there's $10,000 if we apply. I mean, I remember years ago applying for a grant, and then we got the call, you got it. It's like, oh, shit.
Now what? You can get that for the minutes.
Well, but the opportunities appear, and so.
You have to know your needs.
The third strand is, I would ask CCMC if in the corporate offices, if there are people who have that specialty. Since you're dealing with associations around the country, do you have someone, or do you have your finger on potential grant opportunities? Is that something that CCMC corporate has or not?
I'll look into it.
I don't know the.
I would guess
Sure.
not.
But that's,
Okay. Last item I have for the board meeting, which is just a question for Susan, is on the balance sheet here, last month we had $100,000 in cash, and this month we got $80,000 with a $20,000 receivable. Did they just reclass something on you, or what happened?
Actually, the $20,000 receivable is a receivable from CJC to CCS, and it was on there originally. The decrease in cash was, I gotta pull up the financials, probably related to,
Tell you what, just follow
I
up
will.
for the board with a meeting, or an email, that's all I do. Yeah. Yes, Jackson?
I just want to put a pin in something. Back in February, this room was packed with people who had been led to believe that there was something wrong with CCS, that the way that it was handled was wrong, that it was a bad thing. And they were passionate and concerned about their community and about the use of funds and the appropriateness of the actions that took place. I want to thank you, Brian and David, for being the adults in the room, being diligent about the process, about seeking out the answers that we needed from lawyers, from grantors, from the accountants. I think it is important to note, for those of you who are watching on video, Gary Hudspeth is here, and he's the entire audience. And we've come a long way from the point at which this room was filled with people who were angry, to recognizing and talking, as David just spoke, about the possibilities of what CCS can do. It is not a bad entity. It is not an dishonest, distrustful entity. It is an opportunity for us to do something positive for this community. And I appreciate the people that came before, like Vanessa, who worked on CCS. I appreciate the work of the prior CCS board. And I look forward to CCS actually doing something that continues the experience for all of us. And I appreciate that management has made the effort and taken the time to put together all of the information that was requested. And my hope is that we will avoid going down the rabbit hole on things like this in the future and can continue to operate in a productive way.
And I will add to that Susan put in a lot of work,
Yes.
and we'll be
Thank
ready
you.
for the audit. So I do thank her very much publicly for that. Motion to adjourn?
Motion.
some of,
And David is the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. We're adjourned.